How does a decorated Marine, an Eagle Scout, and a devoted husband become America's first mass murderer? What if the first mass shooting in modern U.S. history wasn't just a tragedy, but a warning we ignored? Have you heard the story of the Texas Tower sniper, Charles Whitman? Today, we're going to talk about a man who seemed like the perfect American until he became the nation's first mass murderer. August 1st, 1966. It was just after 11:30 in the morning when the first muffled gunshot echoed across the University of Texas campus in Austin. At first, no one paid much attention. Some assumed it was a backfiring car. Others thought it came from nearby construction. But within moments, students and passersby were dropping to the ground, bleeding, gasping, dying. Panic took hold as it became clear someone was shooting from above. From the observation deck of the university's iconic 27-story main building tower, a man was systematically picking off human beings below. He fired at students crossing the plaza, at drivers passing by, at mothers pushing strollers. He had brought with him an arsenal of weapons, over 700 rounds of ammunition, and a mind fixated on destruction. The shooter was Charles Joseph Whitman, a former Marine, an engineering student, and until hours before, a husband and son. For 96 terrifying minutes, Whitman held the city hostage from his perch, 231 feet in the air. No one felt safe. Ambulances couldn't reach the wounded. Snipers couldn't get a clean shot. Bystanders braved gunfire to pull bleeding victims out of the line of fire. Others hid behind lampposts, trees, or anything that might shield them from the invisible death raining from above. By the time police officers Ramiro Martinez and Houston McCoy reached the tower and ended the massacre, 16 people were dead. Dozens more were injured. The entire nation stood stunned. The headlines called it a tragedy. The police called it a nightmare. But the story that would slowly emerge over the following days was far more disturbing and far more complex than anyone expected. Charles Whitman wasn't just a killer. He was a portrait of pressure, unraveling from the inside out. His life seemed ordinary. His achievements were impressive. But beneath the surface was a man tormented by pain, rage, and something even doctors didn't fully understand. The Texas Tower shooting was the first modern mass shooting in American history, but it wouldn't be the last. This is not just the story of a crime. It's the story of how a man collapses, how a system fails, and how a moment in time becomes a warning for generations. Charles Joseph Whitman was born on June 24, 1941, in Lake Worth, Florida. He was the first of 3 sons in the Whitman family. At a glance, his childhood seemed stable. His father, Charles Adolphus Whitman Jr., owned a successful plumbing business, and his mother, Margaret, worked as the bookkeeper. The family lived in a well-kept home in a respectable neighborhood. But inside that house, behind closed doors, was a different story, one of fear, rage, and control. Whitman's father was a tyrant. Raised in an orphanage himself, he masked his deep insecurities with dominance. He demanded perfection and obedience from his children and complete submission from his wife. When they failed to meet his standards, his response was swift and violent. Neighbors recalled the sound of screaming from inside the house and the regular presence of police responding to domestic abuse calls throughout the 1940s and 50s. One neighbor, Judy Falch, would later say she couldn't remember how many times her parents had called the police on Mr. Whitman for beating his family, his wife, his children, even the family pets. Charles, the eldest, bore the brunt of this fury. But rather than rebel, he tried to outshine it. He became an overachiever, disciplined, brilliant, and determined to earn approval through excellence. At 11, he joined the Boy Scouts. Just 3 months after turning 12, he became an Eagle Scout, the youngest to ever do so at the time. He played classical piano with elegance. He earned top grades in school. Outwardly, he was the model American boy. But discipline became a mask, one that hid the shame and fear rooted in years of abuse. That mask began to crack in his teenage years. After a night of drinking with friends, something deeply forbidden in his household, his father beat him so severely, he threw him into the swimming pool. That night changed him. Determined to escape his father's grip, Charles left home and joined the United States Marine Corps. The military gave him order, purpose, and recognition. He thrived at first, stationed at Guantanamo Bay, where his skill as a marksman and his sense of discipline made him stand out. In 1961, he earned a prestigious scholarship through the Naval Enlisted Science Education Program, which brought him to the University of Texas at Austin to study mechanical engineering. It was there, in the heart of Texas, that the second phase of his life began. On the surface, everything looked promising. He was in college, on a military grant, he had a clean record, and he soon met Kathleen Leisner, a bright and kind young woman who became his wife in 1962. They married in a Catholic church and honeymooned in New Orleans. It seemed like the beginning of a new chapter. But beneath it all, something remained broken. The violence of his upbringing hadn't disappeared. It had simply gone underground, quiet, simmering, waiting. And it would resurface in ways no one could have predicted. Charles Whitman didn't just run from his father. He ran towards something that could give him the control and structure his home life had lacked. In July 1959, just weeks after graduating high school, he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. The Marine Corps was an institution that prized discipline, obedience, and strength, values that had been twisted and weaponized in his household, but now offered him a path to legitimacy. He was assigned to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, where he quickly distinguished himself. His rifle skills were exceptional, and he was known for his precision and calm under pressure. For a time, the rigid routine of military life gave him a kind of peace. He adapted well, respected the chain of command, and performed with excellence. It was in the Marines that he began to build a new version of himself, one not defined by fear, but by achievement. His performance earned him something rare, an academic opportunity through the Naval Enlisted Science Education Program, an ESEP, a program that selected promising enlisted men for full-time college studies. In 1961, Whitman was awarded a scholarship to attend the University of Texas at Austin. He enrolled in the mechanical engineering program, a path that, if completed, would have led to a commission as an officer. For a young man raised under tyranny, the climb toward leadership in one of the most respected branches of service seemed like redemption. But the pressure to maintain perfection began to mount. Whitman's academic performance began to slip. His grades fell below the standards required to keep his scholarship. The distractions of marriage, school, and buried emotional turmoil were eroding the foundations he had built. In 1963, the Marines pulled him from school and reassigned him to active duty at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. By 1965, Charles Whitman had returned to Austin with his wife, Kathleen. On the surface, they lived the life of a young couple chasing the American dream. He resumed classes at the University of Texas, studying architectural engineering, while Kathleen began teaching high school biology. But beneath that fragile normalcy, tensions escalated. Whitman, once the top of his class and a decorated Marine, was now burdened by academic struggles, financial strain, and deepening psychological unrest. His coursework was demanding, and although he registered a full load of 12 to 15 semester hours, his performance rarely met expectations. He was intelligent, brilliant even, but his focus was fractured. He obtained his real estate license in an effort to stabilize their finances, but it added only more responsibility to an already overcrowded life. The weight of underperformance gnawed at him. For someone who had always measured his worth by achievement, failure was intolerable. At the same time, his family life unraveled. In March 1966, Whitman drove to Florida to help his mother escape his father's abuse. After 25 years of violence, Margaret Whitman had finally decided to leave. Charles arranged the move, packed her belongings, and even brought a local police officer to the house in case his father turned violent. It was a decisive act, one that protected his mother, but it also reopened old wounds. The boy who once trembled under his father's fists was now the man trying to contain the chaos. But the past didn't stay behind. Back in Austin, the stress became unbearable. Whitman began experiencing intense migraine headaches, blinding, unpredictable episodes that disrupted his concentration and warped his emotional stability. He tried to push through them with over-the-counter medications like Excedrin. He also began using Dexedrine, a stimulant often prescribed for attention and fatigue, which likely worsened his mental state. His behavior at home grew erratic. He became moody and withdrawn, sometimes consumed by violent thoughts he couldn't explain. It was during this period that he made a rare and desperate move. He sought help. He scheduled an appointment with Dr. Maurice Heatley, the campus psychiatrist. In that single documented session, Whitman confessed things no one else had heard. He talked about his overwhelming sense of failure, his fear that he was becoming like his father, his guilt over the fact that he had struck his wife twice during their marriage. And then he revealed something chilling. Whitman told Dr. Heatley that he had been having fantasies, not vague frustrations, not intrusive thoughts, fantasies of climbing the university's clock tower and shooting people at random. It was a disturbing confession, but Dr. Heatley noted it down without taking formal action. The session ended. No follow-up was scheduled. Whitman never returned. It was the only time he ever reached out for psychological help. The pressures kept building. School, finances, family, his own cracking identity, all of it bearing down on a mind that was fraying at the edges. He was a man unraveling slowly, invisibly. The migraines intensified. The mood swings grew sharper. His sense of control, the one thing he had always clung to, was slipping away. And no one, not his professors, not his friends, not his wife, saw just how close he was to the edge. In the months that followed, Charles Whitman would make his final descent into darkness, and when the breaking point came, it would arrive with devastating clarity. By the end of July 1966, something in Charles Whitman had irrevocably shifted. The slow erosion of his psyche, worn down by a lifetime of violence and unmet demands, had reached its breaking point. What followed was not a spontaneous act of rage, but a calculated plan, executed with military precision. On the evening of July 31st, 1966, Charles Whitman sat down at his typewriter. At 6:45 p.m., he began composing the first of two suicide notes. The language was composed, eerily calm. He explained that he intended to kill his wife and his mother, not out of hatred, but, as he put it, to spare them the shame of what he was about to do. It was a warped rationale, constructed not out of mercy, but control. He wrote that he loved them both, that he couldn't bear the thought of them suffering because of him, and yet he had already made up his mind. They would die before anyone else. While writing, he was interrupted by two friends, Larry and Elaine Fuess, who visited briefly. They later recalled that Whitman seemed oddly content, even relieved. He mentioned Kathleen, his wife, and twice began to say, "It's a shame she has to come home," and before trailing off, the couple left around 9 p.m. Whitman then picked up his wife from work and brought her home. She went to bed, unaware that it would be for the last time. Sometime around midnight, Charles Whitman killed her. He stabbed Kathleen repeatedly in the chest as she slept. Her death was swift and silent. He left a handwritten note next to her body, reiterating his love, and again stating his desire to shield her from what was to come. Then, around 12:30 a.m., he drove to his mother's apartment nearby. There, he attacked her in her bedroom, stabbing her and possibly strangling her to death. He carefully covered her body with bed sheets and placed a second note beside her, written on a yellow legal pad. In it, he claimed he had relieved her suffering after years of abuse by his father. He also expressed an intense hatred beyond description for the man who had shaped his childhood in violence. From there, the plan accelerated. In the early morning hours of August 1st, Whitman began gathering weapons and supplies with chilling efficiency. He rented a dolly and returned to his garage, where he loaded a Marine Corps footlocker with an arsenal. He packed a Universal M1 carbine, a Remington 700 bolt-action rifle, fitted with a scope, a sawed-off shotgun, a .35 caliber pump-action rifle, multiple pistols, and over 700 rounds of ammunition. Alongside the weapons, he packed food, water, vitamins, coffee, Dexedrine, earplugs, a machete, binoculars, rope, and even toilet paper, preparing not for a quick rampage, but a sustained siege. At 9 a.m., He walked into a local hardware store and purchased extra magazines and ammunition. He told the cashier he was headed to Florida to hunt wild hogs. He then visited Chuck's gun shop to buy even more rounds and cleaning solvent, followed by a stop at Sears to purchase the shotgun he would later modify. He paid for all of it with bad checks, including withdrawals from his mother's account. Once fully stocked, he sawed off the shotgun's barrel and buttstock to make it more compact. Then he dressed himself in blue coveralls, an outfit designed to make him look like a delivery man or university maintenance worker. He loaded the footlocker into his car and drove to the University of Texas campus. At 11:25 a.m., he parked near the main building. He approached the guard station and presented a forged research assistant ID badge. Calm and polite, he told the guard he was delivering teaching equipment to a professor. The dolly and heavy trunk were consistent with the story. The guard gave him a 40-minute parking permit. Whitman entered the building just as classes were changing. The timing was no accident. More people meant more targets. When he reached the elevator to the tower, it was shut down. A receptionist named Vera Palmer saw him struggling with the dolly and assumed he was a repairman. She reactivated the elevator switch. Whitman smiled and thanked her. "You don't know how happy that makes me," he said. At that moment, his plan was fully in motion. He reached the 27th floor, wheeled the trunk up a final flight of stairs, and approached the reception area near the observation deck. What happened next would mark the beginning of the most terrifying 96 minutes in American history. At approximately 11:45 a.m. on August 1st, 1966, Charles Whitman arrived at the top of the University of Texas tower. He had reached the 27th floor by elevator, thanks to the kindness of an employee who believed he was a maintenance man. From there, he hauled his weapons-laden footlocker up one final narrow staircase to the small reception area that led to the observation deck. Inside, he encountered Edna Townsley, a 51-year-old receptionist who had worked at the university for years. She was alone, performing her duties in the quiet just before the lunch rush. Whitman struck her from behind, likely with the butt of his rifle, splitting her skull and leaving her unconscious. He dragged her body behind a couch, out of immediate sight. She was still alive, but barely. Moments later, a couple, Donald Walden and Cheryl Botts, entered the area from the observation deck. They briefly interacted with Whitman, not realizing what had just occurred. Whitman remained calm, even polite, greeting them with a smile. They saw the dark stains on the carpet but mistook it for varnish or cleaning residue. Then they left, unaware they had just walked through the edge of a crime scene. Whitman quickly set to work. He barricaded the door leading to the reception lounge, stacking furniture, Townsley's desk, chairs, and a wastebasket against it to delay any pursuit. Just as he began this, a vacationing family from Texarkana approached from the other side. 16-year-old Mark Gabor tried to push through the blocked entrance. Whitman responded with a shotgun blast, killing Mark and his aunt, Marguerite Lamport. He then turned the weapon on the rest of the family, seriously wounding Mark's mother, Mary, and his brother, Michael. The father, Michael Gabor Sr., and another family member narrowly escaped, fleeing down the stairwell in search of help. Knowing his presence would soon be discovered, Whitman finalized his preparations. He shot Edna Townsley again, this time in the head, ending her life. Then he wedged the dolly against the only entrance to the observation deck. Around 11:46 a.m., he emerged onto the outer platform and began arranging his arsenal. He placed rifles, handguns, and ammunition at each corner of the 6-foot-wide deck, creating a 360-degree killing field. He wore a white headband to keep the sweat out of his eyes. From that height, 231 feet above the plaza, he could see everything. At 11:48 a.m., the first shot rang out. His first victim was Claire Wilson, an 18-year-old student walking across the South Mall with her boyfriend, Thomas Ekman. Claire was 8 months pregnant. The bullet struck her in the abdomen, killing her unborn child instantly. As she fell, bleeding and in shock, Thomas bent down to help her. Whitman shot him next, killing him where he knelt, and then the shooting accelerated. In the first 15 minutes, most of his victims were hit. Some fell where they stood. Others ran for cover only to be gunned down mid-sprint. Students, professors, tourists, mothers, teenagers, anyone within line of sight was a target. Whitman did not shout. He gave no warning. His bullets came without direction, without discrimination, and without mercy. From the streets below, the sound of gunfire echoed off the buildings. But for many, the source remained unclear. At first, students believed the noise was from a construction site. Then someone noticed bodies on the ground, blood staining the hot concrete. Movement stopped. Fear took over. Pedestrians dropped to the ground using anything for cover: trees, hedges, light poles. Some froze, some fled. Others, in disbelief, stood still until the next shot dropped them where they stood. Emergency services were overwhelmed. Ambulances were summoned from all over the city. One nearby funeral home dispatched hearses to ferry the wounded. Even a bank's armored delivery truck drove directly into the kill zone in an attempt to evacuate victims. Onlookers, some with no training, ran into the open to drag the injured to safety, dodging bullets to save strangers. By noon, law enforcement had located the source of the shots, but reaching Whitman was another matter. From his high perch, he could see for blocks. Anyone approaching the tower was in danger. Officers attempted to return fire, but Whitman's cover, 4-foot-high stone walls and narrow storm drains, made him nearly invisible. One of the first officers on the scene, Billy Speed, took cover behind a decorative column. Whitman fired through a narrow 6-inch gap between the stones, killing Speed instantly with a shot to the chest. Still, the tower didn't fall silent. Whitman had prepared for exactly this scenario: return fire, panic, delay. But even with his advantage, the clock was ticking. Below him, the city had gone into lockdown. Law enforcement was planning their next move, and inside the tower, a team of civilians and police officers had begun to ascend, quietly, strategically, determined to end the nightmare from within. As shots echoed across the University of Texas campus, a small team inside the tower made its way upward toward the source of terror. Every step brought them closer to Charles Whitman and to danger. Austin police officer Ramiro Martinez had been off duty when he heard the news. He rushed to the main building. Officer Houston McCoy, armed with a shotgun, joined him. Civilian Alan Crum, the co-op bookstore manager across the street, volunteered to help. Though untrained, Crum knew the building's layout and insisted on going with them. They ascended cautiously, stepping past shell casings and the remains of Whitman's earlier victims. The 27th floor was littered with blood and shattered furniture, a silent testament to the violence. Martinez and McCoy crept around opposite sides of the observation deck. Crum guarded the stairwell behind them. The deck was narrow, exposed, and deadly. As Martinez rounded a corner, he spotted Whitman crouched with his rifle. He fired and missed. McCoy raised his shotgun. His first blast hit Whitman in the side. The second struck him in the head. The sniper collapsed. A final round from Crum followed, fired out of uncertainty. But the ordeal was over. The silence that fell was heavy. 16 people lay dead. Over 30 more were wounded. The city was forever changed. The siege had ended, but the reckoning had just begun. With Whitman dead, attention turned to understanding why. His suicide note had requested an autopsy, and the findings were unsettling. Pathologists discovered a glioblastoma multiforme pressing against his amygdala, the part of the brain tied to aggression and impulse control. Though the tumor's influence couldn't be definitively linked to the massacre, it raised disturbing questions. Could biology have played a role in his unraveling? Further investigation revealed Whitman had visited Dr. Maurice Heatley, the university's psychiatrist, weeks before the shooting. In that session, he admitted to violent fantasies, specifically of shooting people from the tower. No follow-up was scheduled. No one intervened. The warning signs had been there: intense migraines, mood swings, emotional instability. His wife had expressed concerns. Friends had noticed changes. But there was no system in place to connect the dots. The term mass shooting didn't exist. Law enforcement had no protocol for such a scenario. The randomness, the location, the scale, it was all new and deeply frightening. The tower remained closed for over 30 years. In 1999, it reopened, and a memorial was added near the base, etched with the names of those lost. A city that had tried to move on finally made space to remember. The Texas Tower shooting was more than a tragedy. It was the beginning of something America still struggles to face. One man, alone and armed, transformed a place of learning into a battleground. Claire Wilson survived, though she lost her unborn child. Thomas Ekman died trying to save her. Edna Townsley, a receptionist, was murdered at her desk. The Gabor family's vacation ended in bloodshed. Dozens of others were left scarred in body and spirit. Survivors carried their trauma quietly. Mental health services were almost non-existent. The event faded from headlines, but not from memory. Today, the frequency of mass shootings makes it easy to forget the first. But the lessons from August 1st, 1966, still matter. Whitman sought help. He described his urges to a professional. Yet the system failed to act. His violence was the result of many failures: neurological, emotional, societal. Too often we remember the names of the perpetrators. The names we must speak are those of the victims. Remembering them is an act of defiance against silence, against inaction, and against forgetting. Whitman was the first. It is our responsibility to ensure there are no more like him. If you've made it this far, it means you're enjoying the story. If you're interested in more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a great story. This is Liam. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.